So, in the fourth chapter of Rune Engelbrecht Larsens' book, Freedom and Righteousness, he's looking into how the tree of liberty, the idea of liberty, and look back at Athena and the Roman times and the philosophers from the Renaissance time, how it all manifested in real life in modern times. And he looks at the United States and how it developed through the 1700s, and especially after that, when it became that state that we all know, by declaring the independence. And then he looks at the other opposite side in the Soviet Union and how they were also wanting freedom from tyranny, and what kind of liberty and equality did they build on that there, and what happened. And he's not digging into details in these two. That would take too much. It's a big detailed history, but he's just giving you the outlines, and that's the beautiful thing about a book like this. It's compressing a lot of thoughts and ideas in small pages, and it lets you use your free association to understand by yourself what's going on and to compare it to modern times. So it's making you aware of the tendencies and how they were practiced, and the tendencies of the states and the ideas of liberty and equality and how they manifested in real life. And so you become a global citizen in a way, understanding all these things and reflecting on them, also looking back at where you stand and what ideology you have with you, and where do they fit in this picture, or are they totally outside. The third thing he looks into is Nazism. Nazism as the product of Hitler and other people's minds, and an occult circle of secret societies that actually helped him to power. He wasn't just doing that by manipulating the people. And they don't really fit in that, but they had a big effect on the world order and how the world shaped after that he's also trying to see what main ideas they have taken from the tree of liberty and the idea of righteousness and freedom and building the notion of a free state and a free life. So that's what I'm going to look into in this chapter, reflecting on my own journey. And we start, of course, with the United States, and he goes all the way back to the Renaissance time and the ideas that started growing from there. It doesn't mean that these ideas weren't in the Middle Ages. They were just not mainstream, and people were satisfied with the rule of the one religion and one God and one king and one religion and one God, and the ideas of society as a place for security and righteousness, and people had their predestined places in it. But the Renaissance and the towns evolving there started like in Firenze and the South Italian towns, Venice, Firenze, and called the political states. They try to look into these new ways of life that could be, and they were fed up with all the rules and regulations and the priests leading society and the corruption that has been going on for a long time, and they started speaking up about it or being persecuted for it, and so it started slowly growing into movements and philosophers and people who joined, and it took several centuries, of course. But he's just looking back at that and saying that there was the look back at the European history and ideas, seeing how it meant for people, and that it was necessary once again to break these normative rules that has been controlling society for so long, and putting some families above others, and putting some kind of religious figures above others, and using everything that is to their power, and restricting several other type of freedoms of art and expressions. And they wanted to look into that, and so with that, a century later or two, when the idea of a new place after Columbus and after discovery of the east coast of the United States and Canada and the Caribbean, people started looking to that new land and fleeing the wars in Europe and the troublesome times that were there. No security, no rights, and if you were of another domination or another idea, you could be persecuted very hard. And so this becomes the promised land, as the Irish philosopher and Bishop George Berkeley, who went to live in what was called New England at that time, and trying to convert the Indians to Christianity. And he wrote about this new America, this new place, as a place that gives hope of a new golden age, where the wisest brains and the purest hearts can have the prospect of like planting and learning and evolving there. And Europe was in a very, very bad shape and state. But here, to the west, it was the new land where hope could prosper again. Hope in what? You can ask yourself. It's the hope of liberty and freedom and righteousness at the same time. That's what people are yearning for. So they want to start a new world. And as Thomas Paine wrote in his pamphlet later, a century later, in 1776, Common Sense, that we want to have the most purest and best constitution on earth, and we want to start the world anew. So it's a new world order, a new way of thinking they wanted to have. And so they started, these ideas, of course, spread among people, and people had them with them, colonizing this new world. And it became like the empire of freedom, as Jefferson would call it later, because people of all kinds, especially Europeans and the race Angleterre, the English race, the English-speaking people, they could find a new haven and build up a new nation, speaking one language, practicing one religious and political system, and getting accustomed to one kind of social way of life. And here we see the idea of the new America building on this freedom, but it also at the same time looks like a freedom for a certain race and religious people, and it's because they want to practice their vision of life in that new place. So when Alexis de Tocqueville came there in the 1800s, and he observed the situation, he could see this new growing brotherhood of American people was the le race anglaise, the English race. And it was like they looked at themselves as a more superior and pure race that was above others in culture and cultivation, understanding. And he could see they will spread to the North American continent, and they had troubles with the Indians and the yellow people and the red people and people from other notions and ideas and more primitive ways. So there was, under this tree of liberty, this notion of the clear race, the race of the English, the place where people could meet in one nation, one language, and one praxis, as was said by several of them. And so America, that new country, was like a kind of a destiny for a certain kind of people, a certain kind of idea that wanted to plant itself there and take over. And at the same time, it has later been looked back at criticized, as Rune Engelbrecht Larsens would say here, that in his book, that you can also say about that time that you could also see a kind of a shelter for racism and greed, because people came there also for egoistic purposes and wanted to expand, and on basis of the right of the land, and they expanded into Indian territories. All the story that has been told later and retold and put on movies and documentaries that can be saddening, or maybe give another historic light on that beautiful idea of liberty and taking over a new nation. So it maybe had also some other notions of some executive and what can you say, special race and people above the others. And in that notion, he speaks about individualism and how it also really unfolded in the Americas and became the most important idea, as being put through by Henry David Thoreau and by Whitman and Thoreau and Emerson, and so they started speaking about this idea of individualism and its importance. And by the way, Wesley Cecil has a good series about individualism in the United States, and the birth of America and its place in history. And he's a very good explaining and very straightforward in his way of speaking. So I can recommend some of his YouTube videos. Wesley Cecil speaking on United States, and one of the parts is also on this issue of individualism. And then the way of individualism is basically built on the idea that everyone must find his own way, and that it's okay to be different, very, very different, and we do not need the herd that actually just are conformists and just look like the others. And you have to stand out and be different, and that's the basic and most important value in you as a human, that you can be self-reliant and you can be closest to yourself and develop your individuality and go race for your place of being out there. And that idea has shaped the United States up until now. And so later, when they started finding gold and the United States became even more important after its proclamation 1776 and the wars that followed of independence, it became a new haven and a place people really started looking towards. And it was a huge area with a lot of space for many people. So people started coming, really, really big numbers from Europe and China and some part of Australia, Mexico, Peru, and Chile. And when I say huge numbers, if you look at it with today's umbrella, it was not so much, several hundred thousands and all that. But at that time, it was big numbers leaving their home countries for this new dream of going west and overtaking the new life and the new way of life, where you can be free to establish your religious beliefs and your ideas and go work for all your rights and the way you want life to be. So it's a kind of manifesting a new destiny of freedom and liberty in the United States, and that's actually what shaped it. And in the end came the Statue of Liberty to symbolize all that. That was given by the French to the United States in 1886 as a thank and as a friendship, and it still today stands in the harbor of New York, and what can you say? It welcomes people who's coming there. And so one of the part of looking at United States was also looking at the freedom of liberty and the goddess of liberty wearing carrying the torch. And later a bronze plate in 1883 was engraved. In 1903 it was engraved in the Statue of Liberty. It was called the Mother of Exiles, that welcomes all the people in need. So it's crying out to everyone who feels suppressed and yearning for freedom to come there, because it was a land of plenty and pleasure and open width and place for everyone to be. At the same time, you can see there were other lines in the United States, the land of the free, where maybe if you look at it with today's what can you say, binoculars, you won't agree. You will say, well, where were the vote for women, and what about how the Indians were assimilated by force? They say there was really a big intervention in the Indians' lives, and the racism, the blacks that were brought by force from Africa to work in the colonies and were not given the same rights and were not looked at as deserving to be free in the same manner. And so all these shadows of that idea of liberty can make you ask, who is it for and who is benefiting from it, and for which people and race, and is that right, and why is it right? And of course they had their own reflections on that and their own arguments, of course, as we know from stories and histories, that, well, the black people weren't developed human, and the red ones were evil spirits, because they were fierce fighters and killers and living primitively. We want to bring them to the more developed society and way of life. So it was like a double thing, double standard in a way as well. You are free, but you must be free our way, and you have your liberty, but it's like under the liberty that the ruling race is giving you, and so it's not easy to live that liberty out, and it has these contradictions in it. Looking to the other side, he was looking at the Soviet Union as well. After that, in the book, he's looking at the proletariat and how they wanted to topple that empire, and the problematic times in Russia in the 1800s and 1900s, the freedom fight for justice for the people of the lowest layers in society, the workers, the peasants, who really were struggling, while the small elite around around the Tsar, the emperor, it was like a big huge difference, and that led to a great disturbance. And at one time, he doesn't mention Tolstoy here, but Tolstoy has had an effect on these issues as well. And later, from the 1840s, we get Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and later we get Lenin, and after Lenin after Lenin, Trotsky. And these four main figures are very known today in history as people who like shaped the idea of the Soviet Union and the union of the free laborers who are taking over power and ending the misuse of the state, the greatest evil of all. And that people have been, as they have said in their books, people has been too used to not criticize and to uphold the rules and follow the life that has been giving them. They don't seem like forced into it, but they are indirectly being subordinate to that way of life, because the culture is imposing it on them, and they have to break free by breaking free from the culture itself, and by looking into it and understanding how to criticize it and turn against it. So they must be free of that manipulation of ideas and manipulation of thought they have been living in the Russian Tsar Empire. And by doing that, they will become so aware that they will build that righteous society, build on equality, and build on the classes disappearing and the state destructed. And people will find their freedom there when there is no more state. That's how they put it in their ideas and books. And it's been quoted here by Rune Engelbrecht, and I'm just taking some summarizing words out of it. And looking into the history of the Soviet Union isn't easy, because it's a big thing and a long time. But one thing we all know is that it collapsed in the 1989, 1990, and during that time it has seen, like especially the time during Joseph Stalin's rule, a reshape of the way this communism had to take place, and how the state became the ultimate power to help and uphold the weak and the proletariat. And I think he's quoting Joseph Stalin here, saying that, well, we succeeded in our Soviet society to realize socialism, and the people are not suppressed anymore. And those two layers, workers and peasants, have totally taken over in a democratic proletarian way the state. And so he's just a representative of all that. And the revolutionary dictator power that had won over that, well, it's not a power that is bound by any kind of tyranny, but by the people itself, something like that. And that all happened in the revolution of 1917, and later in 1930s, when Stalin became the leader and stayed there until his death in 1953. It all shaped that idea of equality, and he sent somebody to kill Trotsky, and Lenin died before that, and they had inner quarrels a lot, and complicated history as well. So it has also had its shadow sides. I think that's what the author is trying to show us by quoting these things, that it was the idea of breaking free and getting freedom. So the tree of liberty and freedom is also deep rooted in Russia, but it was built on the notion of equalism and being under the same and righteous rule of the state, or somebody who can uphold that equal state between people, because individualism was of the evil and the bad. And on the other side, you can see the United States were built on individualism and the free strive, and against these mobs and hubs and people who all have to be the same. They didn't want that, and that laid the foundation later for the Cold War, and very closely erupting into a third world war after the fall of Nazism. And talking about Nazism, it's a difficult thing to fit into the tree of liberty, or the idea of equality, but it has been mentioned because of its big impact on both systems and on the world. And many people know Hitler and know his strife in Mein Kampf to get to power and to change society and to break free from the suppression of the other powers of England and France, who had put very injustice measures on Germany after World War I, where he was a fighter as a young man under the rule of the Kaiser. And so he had these new ideas, and here one of his friends and mentors, Dietrich Eckart, is mentioned very intensively, and he has been Hitler's book was also dedicated to him, because he see that they were the opposing force to two forces they really didn't like. The first one was Bolshevism, the kind of Soviet Union that was getting out through the ideas of Lenin at that time, the idea of equality, liberty, of being equal. And the other idea is the idea of the Jewish elite taking over and having too much power, and the Germans, the Aryan race, were suppressed and used, and he wanted to change all that. So he wanted then the idea of nationalism, Germanism, and Christianity, and order. So these three ideas based his way to write about his political visions. And he had big criticism about the idea of all being free and equal, because there are layers to races, and some races are better and well developed than others, and they used a lot of theory from scientific people to try and prove that. And he and the people of Nazism also criticized Paulus, the Jew, who affected Christianity and took Jesus out of his correct role as the proclamator of the Aryan and free race that should have followed him, and made him like a Jewish figure. And at the same time, he used the works of Luther, who had this very harsh criticism on how the Jewish society and Jewish people were forming society and impacting it. So they looked very negatively at the Jewish people and their role and their control, and built up such kind of opposition to it. So basically, he wants to say his philosophy of the world, according to the book here, and quotes, of course, from Hitler's own book, and that guy Dietrich Eckart's discussion book with Hitler from 1920s. He says that, well, he believed there is a creator force, but he doesn't believe in a certain God or certain religion, and he doesn't like that. And everything in life is about keeping the race, and that kind of people that has distinguished themselves has to fight and has to defend themselves, and thereby destroy their opponents who are taking away their glory and the place in history. And that's what he wanted to do in his life. And he said, I will destroy that Jewish Bolshevik world, because in his opinion, it was like taking on a lot of the power that they, as the German race and the white Aryan race, should have had. Later, it was also discovered, as the book mentions here, that they had these occult roots and societies they belonged to. So they were not just people who came out of the free. And here's something to dig into, maybe later for history. But anyhow, Nazism didn't really fit in, neither in the idea of liberty or equality. It was just a kind of very hard-on idea of the better race, the power to bring that race to top and give it the freedom and to control things. And then things got out of hand later, of course, where he wanted to invade the whole world and turn it into colonies for the Nazism and arranged people and communities in, I don't know, 17 or 23 layers of importance and development. And so we can see this is neither a religious sect, neither a nationalist or a freedom-seeking or equal-seeking. It's something of a metamorphosis of different ideas, and at the same time nothing at all, because maybe just a great instinctive reaction in that people that later followed Hitler and took up World War II and lost in 1945. So this is the chapter on the United States, Soviet Union, and Hitlerism. And to sum it all up, Franklin D. Roosevelt had talked about in the State of Union in January 1941 about the dictators in the world, and talking about Japan, Germany, and Italy. He says, well, what distinguishes us in the West and what we want is the free liberties and free freedoms. The first one is the freedom to speak freely. And the second one is speak and express yourself freely. Second one is to that everyone has the right to worship God in his or her own way, all over the world. And the third one is the notion of freedom from hunger and freedom from suppression, economical suppression and need. And the fourth one is the freedom from fear. So no one should fear any aggressor or anyone above him. It should be a world that is the antithesis of the order of tyranny and dictatorship that we want, and thereby stating these ideals of what he saw was the way for people to follow and be content with. And that's the chapter I go on speaking about totalitarian movements and inclusion, exclusion in the next chapter.